Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
An abandoned wife takes in a street dog. But Cindy didn't know what twist of fate would soon await her. Cindy, what's there to think about? Go away, you're already away from him. The short, pretty girl reached for a bright yellow marmalade and studded with sugar. She sat across from her friend and looked at her with visible pity in her eyes. I don't understand how anyone can tolerate being treated like this, she said, then lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. And I'm sorry, of course, but your Dave is so ugly. She squirmed as if she'd just eaten a whole lemon. Anyway, it's up to you. But if I were you, I'd leave him a long time ago. Cindy thought for a moment. She reached for her cup of tea carefully, and the sipping of the hot drink warmed her body, and she covered her eyes. That's it, I already understand. With annoyance, said at last, Cindy, how am I going to leave him? He'd be lost without me. And then, how can I be alone with 3 kids? It would be crazy. Cindy grabbed my head with both hands. Because your hubby's been a big help to you. Kathy noted caustically. She reached again for the small glass plate of sweets. You can't argue with that. Kathy was as right as ever. Cindy had recently gone through a very difficult labor. 2 wonderful and very cute babies were born. Cindy gave birth to 2 twin girls. Dave, Cindy's husband even before she was pregnant, pushed hard for Cindy to have another baby, but did not help his wife at all with childcare. Maybe he wasn't ready for his wife to have 2 children at once. Or maybe he didn't quite realize the level of new responsibility when he contemplated having another child. Even insisted, rebuked her day and night. What kind of woman are you? Such a family should be normal. And the fact that it's 1 child, you need at least 2. He was pecking her brains out with his reproaches. So she decided to have a second child. Despite the fact that Dave, frankly, wasn't even capable of supporting 1 child. Or maybe it could be anything. Another man's family is another man's convent. Kathy never understood her friend. In any case, there was no answer to that question. Children, on the other hand, were. In addition to the infant twins, Cindy and Dave had another child, their eldest son, Alex. And if in the upbringing of Alex, Dave at least poorly, but helped his wife, then with the twins immediately after the birth, he almost ceased to appear at home. He disappeared more and more often preferred to lie on the couch than to do at least one of his children. The only assistant to Cindy was her grandmother, Lucy. The old lady managed to replace the young mother as dead parents and quite alive and healthy husband. Dave probably didn't quite understand what it was like to be a responsible parent. The couple were the same age, both 36 years old. And if Cindy herself at this age was spinning like a squirrel in a wheel, her husband, undoubtedly, for some time he was making good money. The man had his own small business, several coffee shops. However, as the years went by, the big fast food chains almost drove him out of this market with their tiny eateries. And at home, the father of the family, Dave, for his partners and employees, turned into an infantile boy unable to heat even a bowl of soup on his own, insisting on the birth of another child. Dave probably didn't have time to realize the difficulties that would enter their quiet and measured life. Having a baby was probably no more new to him than buying a new television. Dave didn't realize how difficult it was to raise 3 children at once. He didn't understand how hard it was to carry, to give birth to twins. Maybe he didn't realize it because he hadn't carried children or given birth to them himself. Maybe. In any case, Dave renounced his proud title of head of the family and disappeared more and more, eventually stopping coming home altogether. Kathy sent her palm a centimeter away from the girl's face. I'm asking you, is Dave helping you? What's the holdup? Asked the girl, slightly raising her already thin, squeaky, cool voice. You're right, Cindy replied calmly. He doesn't help me at all. The whole household is on me and my grandmother. But man, how can you leave your husband after 10 years of marriage? I mean, he's like family to me. And that's how Kathy parried me, nice and easy. Or maybe you like carrying 4 people at once. Oh, it's hard, Kathy, Cindy replied sadly. She put the empty cup on the table and started to pack. Thanks for inviting me. But I've got to go. Grandma's probably going crazy without me. It's kind of hard to sit with kids that long at that age. Yeah, come on, said Kathy, not letting go of another marmalade. Well, think about it and give it up already. She shook her hands carelessly and stood up after Cindy to escort her friend out and closed the front door behind her. Cindy, already standing in the doorway, and threw Kathy a suspicious and even mocking look. Kathy, why did you start urging me to dump Dave so often? If you weren't my friend, I'd think you were trying to steal him away from me. Cindy smiled kindly, making it clear that what she'd said was just a friendly joke. Cindy knew her friend well, and her eyes were wet. Kathy laughed nervously. No, she even held like a large and strong horse. She saw her friend off like that, slamming the door so that she almost hit Cindy on her soft spot. Cindy, who was already in the entryway, wondered what was wrong with her today. She asked herself that question and shrugged her shoulders and hurried home. Her friends lived in the same neighborhood. Cindy entered the apartment. "Grandma, I'm home," she shouted. She takes off her boots. Walking inside, she quickly washed her hands and hurried to change. By the time Cindy was on her way out of her bedroom, she was almost knocked off her feet. Running out ran Alex swiftly. "Mommy, Mommy," shouted the boy. Alex had just recently turned 10 years old, and he was absolutely sure that he had become an adult. "Mom, how did you go for a walk?" he asked. "Did you go to Aunt Kathy's?" "Yes." "When is she coming to visit again?" Cindy kissed the boy on the cheek. "Oh, I don't know, honey. Aunt Kathy has been very busy lately. I don't think she'll be able to find time for us." The boy was genuinely surprised, but she'd just been here a little while ago. "I wish she would come again." He began to jump, and with his jumps, he made a few quick circles around his mother. Cindy felt dizzy. "Alex, don't make it up. Aunt Kathy hasn't been here in a long time. So where are your sisters?" "That's not true." The boy frowned his blonde eyebrows. He was about to continue the argument, but then the whole space was filled with a baby cry. Lucy came out into the living room, holding 2 babies in her arms at once. One toddler alone. A toddler can be terribly loud, and too disgruntled Alex closed his ears and ran to his room. "How are you guys doing?" asked Cindy, trying to shout over the cries of the hungry and probably insanely schooled by their mother children. "Good," you shouted back Lucy, handing the babies into the arms of her granddaughter. Cindy took the babies and walked with them to the nursery. She sat down and began to feed the girls, rocking and soothing them. When the babies stopped screaming, she whispered to the grandmother sitting across from her, "Grandma, thank you for sitting with them." The girl's voice was one of sincere gratitude, though she was leaving, let's say, not exactly on important business. Lucy had no problem agreeing to look after her great-grandchildren. Cindy needed a change of scenery. She needed to recharge, to shake things up, to chat with an old friend over a cup of strong tea. It was just right. Lucy had no problem letting her granddaughter go to her friend's house. She could see how tired Cindy was. The old lady nodded nobly. "You're welcome." "Cindy, so how was it? Tell me about it." "Oh, Grandma." Cindy, having already finished feeding, carefully handed the grandmother to one of her daughters. The women got up and started pumping the babies in their arms. "We had a good time. Except Kathy. She's been telling me non-stop lately to dump Dave. I mean, you can imagine the pressure she's putting on me." "Well, Grandma, Dave, who's yours?" "You have to admit, he hasn't been himself lately. He's always disappearing. He doesn't pay any attention to the kids." "No, I don't agree with your Kathy. But still, maybe he shouldn't be abandoned, but he should be rehabilitated." Cindy laughed. "But would you say he's a dog to be rehabilitated?" "Well, maybe not a dog," the old woman thoughtfully stretched out, "but all men are like that. They are only an eye and an eye. Look, they will steal your husband and an eye. You won't have time to lead. Grandma pulled her grandson, and I won't need such a man." The women downloaded the babies and put them in the crib at the same time. A man who can be led away like a goat on a leash is no longer a man, no longer a husband. At least Lucy good-naturedly giggled. "You're right, granddaughter, you're 100% right." She looked carefully. "Cindy, you're beautiful, young, but so tired and washed out. Her lush, dark curls were gathered into a neat bundle. Dark circles were visible under her bright blue eyes. "How much do you look like your mother?" With sadness in her voice, the old woman remarked. She had lost her daughter Cindy's mom more than 20 years ago. Cindy's parents died in a plane crash. Lucy was left all alone with little Cindy. How hard was it for her then? No support, no advice, not a single and close soul by her side. The woman left the nursery and headed for the kitchen. Cindy continued the conversation. "By the way, Dave's been showing up in my absence." "Careful?" the girl asked. The old woman shook her head languidly. "No, the children and I haven't seen him." Cindy was visibly upset, but tried not to give the appearance of attentive Lucy. She understood without a word. "But Cindy, don't be upset. Maybe he was working late. Anything can happen." Cindy tried to squeeze out a smile, but it didn't come out well. She started to heat up the dinner her grandmother had already prepared to feed the eldest child. "But it's getting late. Why don't you stay with us?" Grandma shook her head. "There's more." She laughed. "No, I'm going home. Nancy's still waiting for me." Cindy smiled at Nancy. So the old woman lived not far from Cindy. All alone. But if you didn't count the little new-from-age lid as a tenant. Nancy, well, if Nancy's waiting. Then run along, the old lady jokingly bent over. "Thank you, mistress, tomorrow not." She, chuckling, left the kitchen. Cindy was left alone. To be honest, after the twins were born, she'd been hit by a real postpartum depression. And in those rare moments when she was alone, her eyes immediately began to sting with tears and the air felt like it was getting smaller and smaller. Cindy closed her eyes, tried to pull herself together. She breathed deeply, trying to hold back the sudden tears. Her hands shook. A rope seemed to be thrown around her throat, trying to strangle the poor girl. Suddenly there was a longing, a pain, and an anguish that was incommensurate with the reality of the situation. Why is all this happening to me? With vexation and longing, Cindy asked herself. She didn't know what it was that made her so upset, but she couldn't regain her composure. Cindy burst into tears, unable to figure out what was driving her to such a state. Maybe hormones. In a minute, she was literally sobbing with her hand over her mouth. At that moment, the door to the kitchen opened and Cindy's husband, Dave, appeared on the doorstep. "Cindy," he looked perplexed at his wife. "What's wrong with you?" And almost indifferently. Walked past his wife, opened the refrigerator, took out a can of beer from there. The can opened with a little singing, took a couple sips. "Hey, Cindy, I'm talking to you or the closet." But the woman couldn't stop the flow of unsolicited tears. When she managed to pull herself together a little, she slowly turned her big, weeping eyes to her husband. "Where have you been?" In a cold tone, she asked. Where? Dave said thoughtfully, taking a big sip of beer. "At work, of course." "What do you care anyway?" "What do you mean?" Cindy was genuinely surprised. She took out another plate so that she could feed not only her son but also her husband dinner. "Actually, I'm your wife. Don't I have a right to know where my husband disappears to?" Dave was silent in response. When Cindy placed a steaming plate of rogue in front of him, he immediately began to silently reduce the food. Cindy about the porridge was pouring and carefully said 5. "Call Alex for dinner, please." "Call him yourself," snarled the man. "Don't you see, I'm tired at work. I'll be running around here like a messenger handing out dinner invitations. He's hungry and will come. Actually, I'd like to eat in silence. These kids are getting on my nerves." He didn't finish his sentence, but Cindy already knew what he meant. "Kids what, Dave? What? Got to you?" "Yes," plopped down in his chair, covering his head with his hands. "Is it okay that they're your own kids?" she asked, raising her already angry tone even more. "You wanted younger children so badly. You asked so much. You insisted so much. And then what happened? Did you ever hold the girls in your arms, except in the hospital?" Dave frowned, but didn't answer. Then Cindy continued, "I'm tired. You know, you're tired as a dog. I've got 3 kids to take care of, cleaning, cooking. You're just as much a parent as I am. Do you have to?" "No, you'd have to help me if it weren't for your grandmother." "Speaking of your grandmother," Dave perked up. I crossed paths with her in the driveway. She's gonna be wrong for a long time. Doesn't she have her own place? Cindy laughed. Are you even listening to me? She rose from her chair, stepping closer to her husband. I can't cope. I can't do it alone. I need help. If it wasn't for Grandma, I'm sick of you and your grandmother. Dave got up from the table with a mushroom and a plate. This is how I'm welcomed home. I'm tired after work, and all you can do is piss me off. Let's do it in the bedroom. At least I'll be alone. With these words, the man left the kitchen. Cindy exhaled nervously. She shook her head and went to Alex's room, calling him for dinner. When the boy had finished, he asked his mom, is Dad home yet? Yes, I think I heard his voice. Yes, son, Cindy answered. Why? Why didn't he say hello to me? Asked the worried boy. Lately, he needed the companionship of his father more than ever. Daddy is very tired. Alex, he works to support us. But you work too. The boy argued. Cindy did work, but it was hardly a full-time job, which was something her husband was often pissed off about. Cindy worked part-time at a small online store. She worked from home in customer service, but such work paid very modestly. And now she had no free time to earn money at all. Thanks schedule was floating, and the woman was still in the ranks of employees. Well, Alex, I make a lot less money than your father, so it's harder for him. No offense to him, he's just tired. Are you tired too? The boy answered her. But you spend time with me. And he child abruptly got up from the table and ran to his room. When the whole kitchen was cleaned, Alex put to bed, and the younger children once again fed, and once again stand down. Cindy began to get ready for bed. She showered, checked on the girls once more, and both of them strenuously wandered to the bedroom. Dave was already asleep on the floor, trying not to wake him, quietly lay down next to her as her hand reached for the light switch. That made her heart race and her hand shake even more than usual. She left the light on and shook her husband nervously by the shoulder. Dave, wake up. The young woman shouted, trying not to cry again. Shit. The man jumped up sharply on the spot. He looked at his wife in surprise, then wiped his face with his hands. You are completely out of your mind. Stupid, Dave shouted. I shouldn't have come back. I should have spent the night somewhere else tonight. I didn't doubt you had somewhere else to sleep. Cindy whispered. What's that? She asked with her finger pointing at the man's back. What's puzzled? Asked Dave. He started to twist around awkwardly, but of course he couldn't see his own back. Then he got to his feet and wandered over to the mirror in the corner of their bedroom. And this, he muttered puzzledly. That's exactly what it is, angrily replied the wife. The thing was that before turning off the bedroom light, Cindy had noticed a long longitudinal scratch on her husband's back. She didn't immediately realize what it was, but after a couple of seconds, a fantasy overtook her mind, cordially, providing pictures of her spouse in the bedroom with another. Yes, Dave had miscalculated when he had gone to bed with his wife's back to him. Cindy repeated her question. What is this? I'm asking you. Well, it's a sore, don't you see? A scratch. Slowly and faintly, the man said, realizing that he had been caught red-handed. Cindy covered her face with her hands, trying not to show the pain she was feeling at that moment. Dave continued to stand at the mirror. He ruffled his hair, shifting from foot to foot. He was silent for a moment, and then his face changed in a flash, and he approached the bed on which Cindy was sitting. His face contorted into an angry grimace. He broke into a shout. Yes, I have a woman enough, shouted he. So from Nanny's radio came the faint reading of children and long ago. And I love her. He continued to shout. It's a good thing you discovered that yourself. I already didn't know how to say and what else to do to make you think of it at last. Cindy clarified at length. Her voice sounded quietly impotent. It seemed as if she were about to faint. Yes, long ago her husband bellowed with renewed vigor. How did you finally wake the children? A deafening shriek of disgruntled babies came from the Nanny radio. I'm sick of all this. He waved his hand toward the radio. Those kids screaming. You're not pretty or Teddy yourself. I can't live like this anymore. But you yourself wanted children so much. His wife answered him in tears. You dreamed of a big family. Then I was wrong. I don't need all this. It's not mine. I'm sick of babies screaming, stinking diapers. I'm sick of my wife running herself ragged. That's why I'm leaving." He resolutely went into his closet, started going through his clothes. At that moment, Alex came into the bedroom. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing?" The boy stood in the doorway and frightenedly dragged at his parents. "Honey." Cindy had no time to calm the child down before she was interrupted by Dave. "Nothing. Go to bed. I'm sick of this. Go back and forth," the man yelled at his own innocent son. "I'm leaving. I have to go on a business trip right away. Shut your mouth," I said, threatening. Shouted he, again, seeing that the child is about to pay in his voice, went out to his room. The last of those cruel words remained hanging in the bedroom. And the cats all choked with left poison, and Dave himself ran out of the bedroom. And after a while from the apartment, the room seemed to be confused by fear. It seemed that the very air in the house abandoned by the father of the family became thicker, that it could be touched if you reached out. "Mom," the boy stretched out frightened. What's going to happen now? Cindy was in complete shock. If she hadn't been a mother, she would have burrowed deeper into the blanket and forgotten everything about the world and spent the next week in his arms, only occasionally going to the bathroom or the kitchen. But she had 3 children. Oh God! She slapped herself lightly and got out of bed in a flash, grabbed the boy's hand and rushed to the nursery to calm the cries of Dave the kid. The rest of the night passed restlessly. She managed to calm the screaming girls and her oldest son at the same time. But Cindy was already mired in her own depression. But now that her husband had left them, she just didn't know how to go on. Frightened, lost, abandoned. She was left all alone with no husband, no support. Of course, even before that, it couldn't be said that Cindy had a strong male shoulder at her side. Rather, it was Helsinki narrow, unreliable shoulder, but at least it was how and on what they will now all exist. Dave did not help his spouse at all in the household, but he brought money into the house, a little and reluctantly, but still. So what's left to do now but rely on alimony? Cindy was crushed by this new and terrible shock. In the morning, when the children had finally settled down and she had not been able to sleep, she decided to call her friend, and there was a long ringing tone. Then finally, Cindy heard Kathy's voice. "Hello." Apparently, the call had woken her up. "Cindy, are you there? Have you seen what you're doing?" Kathy asked angrily, coming to her senses a little. "Hi. Oh, sorry. It's just that I'm having a brief pause here. Anyway, I've got Dave leaving me," said like a woman cut off. What did Kathy hold out? You could hear her getting out of bed, left on her own. Wow, he left on his own. I caught him cheating. Can you believe my whole back was scratched? I'm in total shock. You know what kind of predatory woman he is. It's like she wanted me to see those marks on purpose. You think so? Kathy stretched out thoughtfully. That's right. Where is he now? Did she perk up? Where did he go? How should I know? Cindy wondered, probably gone to his mistress. What the hell kind of Wolverine is that? What claws? Oh, after embarrassed her friend Kathy just loved to build herself long, brightly colored nails. Cindy herself preferred a neat, modest manicure at least, because with small children it was inconvenient to have long nails, and she simply did not like such a manicure. I'm sorry, you have great nails. No offense, but that was an offhand remark. And his mistress. Oh, who is she? Philosophically, Cindy asked. I'm curious too. Kathy replied sullenly. She made a strange sound. She seemed to want to say something else, but was interrupted. Both girls rang Kathy's doorbell and the phone went silent. Hello, Cindy was scared for her friend. It's almost 500 am. Who's at your door at this hour? You better not open the door, Kathy interjected nonchalantly. You're imagining things. Yeah, I think I heard the doorbell ring. Kathy, don't open the door. I don't know who's bothering you, Cindy repeated. Yeah, okay, I'm sleepy. I'll call you later, Kathy answered and dropped the call. Cindy wondered what Kathy was up to, strange lately. Could it be her new man? Is it affecting her like this? The woman thought to herself, trying to distract herself from her own problems. Lately, Kathy had been talking nonstop to her friend about her new crush, about her man. She could talk about him for hours, forgetting about everything around her. Kathy had never been married, and she had no children. Nor did she have any problems with her job. Cindy's friend was carefree. She lived on the money left to her as an inheritance by her rich aunts, and she had no problems at all. When this last man came into her life, Kathy was overjoyed. She was always talking about him. How sensitive, kind, considerate he was. True, she never introduced her only friend to her chosen one. As a result, that man was nicknamed Mr. X after all. No one but Kathy herself had ever seen him. At first, Cindy resented her friend. She didn't understand why she didn't want them to meet at all. Then she reconciled herself and listened with pleasure to stories about how beautiful that mysterious man was. There are real princes, Cindy thought dreamily. After listening to her friend's story, at first she was even a little envious of Kathy. Such a man, as they say, is worth his weight in gold. And after a while began to suspect that this romantic hero, and it all a figment, playing Vasia girlfriend's imagination. And even laughed a little, teased her, but kindly just played along. Another reason to hide the mysterious Mr. X like that. Cindy couldn't imagine. He never visited Cindy that night. She barely dozed off abruptly, as if from a jolt she woke up and ran to the babies in alarm. She fancied they were coughing fearfully, but all was perfectly well. Both the girls and Alex were peacefully consulting in their cribs. Then Cindy went to the bathroom, stood under the hot shower, and tried to forget everything. Dipped herself in the running jets. It helped a little, but not for long. The children woke up. Barely had she just had time to pour herself a cup of coffee. The drink remained untouched, and the day raced at its usual gallop. Washing her, changing her clothes, feeding her, a quick breakfast, a walk during which she wanted to sleep wildly. But as soon as we stopped the stroller and sat down on the bench, the babies would start screaming. I had to walk and walk with them, cutting circles around the deserted morning park. Depression attacked the girl with renewed vigor, and Cindy lost all taste for life. She spent the next couple of weeks as if in troubled waters. And the lost young mother seemed to have no life at all. She existed only in her daily duties as a mother of 3 small children. Although Cindy did not want to admit it even to herself, but somewhere in her heart she hoped that her husband would come to his senses, that he would return, forgetting about his mysterious, as pure mistress, and finally realize that there is nothing in the world more precious than family. Time passed. Cindy was still suffering the same way. And Dave never thought of going back to his family. I mean me, but the kids. Cindy thought to herself. She couldn't believe that he had given up on his family so easily. She didn't understand how he could forget about his children, his own children. Cindy was crazy with worry even when she went grocery shopping at the supermarket, leaving them with their grandmother, wandering between the shelves of bands. There was no way she could stop thinking about the babies, how they were doing, if they were okay. The woman was worried when she didn't see the twins and Alex near her, all in the span of a few hours. And then, lo and behold, there's Dave. Just like that, he's gone. Didn't he think about what it would be like for the girls to grow up without a father? Didn't he think about what it would be like for Alex to see his own dad practically abandon him? Dave was never heard from. He never even called, let alone come over and ask how his kids were doing. Once Cindy had even considered the possibility that something might have happened to the man. But that thought wasn't destined to develop into anything more. 3 weeks later, Cindy was served with a lawsuit to dissolve Dave's marriage. Cindy was divorced while the former spouses were in court. The woman couldn't even bring herself to look in her husband's direction. That's how much it hurt. Dave, on the other hand, also did not look at his ex-wife. Maybe he was ashamed, or maybe he just didn't care about the latter. Either way, the trial went smoothly, without tantrums or tears. At some point, Cindy wanted to throw herself at her ex-husband's feet, to throw herself at him and beg him not to leave them. But she was always a proud woman who knew her own worth. She would have continued to hold her posture proudly if she hadn't heard one important detail. When it came to alimony and the court set the amount to be paid, Cindy simply exploded with indignation. The blood boiled in her ears, echoing the pounding of her own pulse. "What do you mean, minimum payments?" Terrified, she asked. "Dave is unemployed. He doesn't have the ability to pay the larger amount, so the court is ordering a minimum alimony payment." Her ex-spouse's representative replied in a calm tone. "What do you mean he's unemployed?" "He's self-employed." Cindy exploded in a frenzy. "He has a successful business in his coffee shops daily and earns over $1,000 in revenue." She turned to screaming. She was shaking with resentment and with anger. How would she be able to support the children alone? He's their father. Her hands shook. Her whole body went floppy nasty. "Then my business went under." Calmly, and she thought, mockingly, Dave said, "I don't have a lot of money to support 3 kids right now." And he added quietly, leaning toward her and smiling smoothly, "You'll have to figure it out on your own. You gave birth to them." Cindy lost all self-control. "And you had no part in the birth of those children?" "Yes," she asked. In a shaky tone, "He's lying," shouted she, turning to the judge. "His business is doing just fine. There is simply no such thing." To order, the judge tapped his gavel warningly. At the moment, according to the documents, there is nothing registered in Dave's name. His business activities have ceased. There's no official income. The minimum payment is the most you can get from him. "But what am I supposed to do?" "Are you powerless?" Cindy asked. "I'm still on maternity leave. I don't have the money to support 3 children. Provide the court with evidence of your ex-spouse's income. And then the question of the amount of alimony can be reconsidered." The judge said dryly, "Stop whining." Dave quietly insulted and say thank you that I left you the apartment and do not claim it. The woman laughed. Her voice sounded like the voices of mentally ill people. It seemed to her that everything that was going on was just a devilish representation of her imagination. "But do you know this is my apartment? My parents left it to me. If you'd even dare to claim it." Dave shrugged indifferently. The judge dismissed the case. Divorce finalized, alimony awarded. Cindy was left with nothing. She walked home, despite the fact that it was quite far to walk, contemplating her future life. The icy wind blew in her face, and now and then dry leaves stuck in her hair as they flew past. My feet occasionally fell into deep puddles. Late fall had descended on the streets of the city. A downright cold, rainy one. Cindy, ignoring her industrial scraped feet, walked along the highway. Her life was completely ruined, no prospects, and further existence had lost all meaning. Cars squealed past, occasionally giving the woman a dirty splash. But Cindy paid no attention to it. She was crushed. Stopping, she slowly shifted her gaze to the cars. And then a frightening, terrifying, and at the same time, unusually attractive thought visited her head. One step, and it was all over. With a kind of detached joy, Cindy thought. In a kind of trance, she took this step, and then the second. A passing car screeched to a halt and flew into a deep puddle. And the woman was splashed with icy water from head to toe. The driver rushed on. She looked at him sadly. She took another step. It seemed that she was being pulled by invisible strings like a doll. Cindy thought she had finally found a way out. It was so close. All that was left was to choose the right moments, to throw herself under the wheels so that they would not have time to slow down. Suddenly, Cindy stopped abruptly. In her mind's eye, the faces of her children flashed before her eyes. The girls, they were so small and defenseless, and her son, her darling boy. How would they be without her? Cindy shook her head and only then had time to realize how close she was to death. Her back was covered in cold sweat. "Yasha, I just almost did." She didn't finish her thought and rushed to run with all her legs. When she got back to the footpath, she started rubbing her face with her hands. Her hands, clothes, and hair were all covered in mud. She looked at herself and marveled. What state had she brought herself to? No, she would live for her children. As time passed, the days passed, but Cindy never got any lighter. Her only incentive to live was her children. She had set a clear goal to raise them, to provide for them, and to keep them safe. Cindy was determined that she would raise the little ones, give them everything they needed. And then, when they were no longer in need of her, she could do the deed. And she, gritting her teeth, continued to manage the household, to take care of the kids, to work. But on her own life, Cindy put a fat cross. Lucy moved into Cindy's apartment. The space allowed. The girl's parents left her a large 4-room apartment as an inheritance. Lucy's 1-room apartment they rented out, which allowed to have at least some additional income. Pension, grandmothers, money from rent, and the crumbs that Cindy could earn on the internet. That was it. What did they have? Just the bare essentials. Not to the point of luxury, although luxurious. Cindy had never been before. Stingy Dave allocated to the family exactly as much as was necessary. There was never any talk of expensive things and foreign trips. Even on the most ordinary family vacations. They had traveled together God knows how many years ago. The son had been a toddler then. Now Cindy suspected. No, she was just sure that the bastard spent all his money on other women. One bitterly cold October afternoon, Cindy decided to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. She left her grandmother with the children and went to one of the coffee shops where her ex-husband's office was located. On the way, Cindy kept replaying in her head the events that had taken place in court. She could not believe that Dave's business had really failed. It seemed impossible to her. Before they'd broken up, he'd been doing just fine. Cindy headed toward the coffee shop with the sole purpose of catching her ex-husband red-handed. Take pictures of a thriving business and bring the evidence to court. Maybe they got mixed up, or had Dave managed to cover his tracks so cleverly? Either way, she needed proof that the father's business was thriving, and he was obliged to pay his offspring decent child support. Cindy walked up to the coffee shop and froze in place. Sure, the place was in full swing. A crowd of customers piled around, holding paper cups of coffee. Through the large windows, it was obvious that the staff was signing in. So many people were there. Cindy exhaled heavily. So this is how she felt the rage start to fill her body, and pulled out her cell phone to start recording video evidence. Cindy started filming. She captured the front of the coffee shop, videotaping everyone leaving from the customers coming inside, so that Dave would have no chance to say that the business was not generating proper revenue. She caustically commented on the footage and finally went inside to elbow the customers. Advancing forward and remembering to videotape everything that was happening. Tricky. She took advantage of the fact that she knew the hidden passages from the eyes of visitors and went inside the back room with the purpose to take Dave by surprise and show future viewers that the coffee shop really belongs to him, and he has a very, very good income. Cindy went inside, walked up to the supervisor's office. It was obvious that there was a light on inside. That meant that Dave was at his workplace. Cindy rejoiced to herself, opened the door abruptly, and the cell phone fell out of her hands, screen down, shattering in the process. Kathy reprimanded Cindy in a fallen voice. "What are you doing here?" irritatedly asked her friend. The young mother hurriedly pulled on her clothes. She was sitting upright in Dave's arms. Both were half undressed. "Kathy, it's true." Yuan Cindy couldn't believe what was happening. Her best friend and her ex-husband. How is that possible? "No, man," Julius Keezer ironically replied Kathy. "What are you doing here? Can't you see? We're busy." Cindy didn't know what to say. She knew Dave had another woman, of course, but to have her Kathy like this, she couldn't believe her eyes. How long had this been going on? Asked a helpful Reddy, coming to her throat. "Calm. How could you? How could you?" "Not the first year," replied Kathy, finally putting on her clothes. "And you're an idiot, dear, if you haven't noticed. I love Dave and he loves me. You've always been redundant. I'm an extra." Cindy was taken aback. "Is that why you kept telling me to dump Dave? You really had your eye on him. God, and I thought you were my friend. How dare you?" Anna asked, "And that's how you didn't appreciate your man. Now you're just sitting there with your nose in the air." She got close to Cindy, but she was giving birth to a horde. "Do you think he needs it?" She laughed caustically. "You're just a walking incubator. So that's who your secret macho man is?" And here I thought Cindy was thinking out loud. Things seemed to be starting to make sense. Kathy's nervous behavior and her mysterious lover. "Yes, that's him." Kathy replied with pride in her voice and moved closer to Dave again to leave a demonstrative kiss on his lips. Cindy didn't know what to say. She shifted her gaze from the silently superior Dave to her friend, who was so angry and, as it turned out, completely unknown to her. Finally, she came out of her daze, proudly squared her shoulders. "All right," she laughed playfully. "Well, good luck to you. Lovebirds. It's just a pity, of course, that now you'll have to pay alimony." She looked at her ex-husband. "Yeah. Dave, I have proof. I videotaped the whole thing and I'm taking it to court. It shows your business is booming. And you, Milo, is with some girl. Sitting in the director's chair, ready to pour your purse strings." Smiling victoriously, she squatted down to take the phone in her hands and froze. The device's screen was shattered, and the phone itself had stopped working altogether. Kathy, nastily, laughed, which broke her proof. "What a moron you are," she laughing through her head. "And you don't have any proof. There never was and there never will be. Dave signed the firm over to me a long time ago. So he really doesn't have any business. You're out of the money. Asshole." She took a wide step towards Cindy and was insulted. "Now get out of here." And Cindy had no choice but to leave the place with a broken phone in her hand. A couple of weeks later, late fall took over, the time when winter had not yet arrived, and the bright colors had already faded. It was windy, slushy gray. Such weather was entirely in keeping with Cindy's inner state of mind. After that day, when she found out that she was betrayed not only by her husband, but also by her best friend, the girl went into an even more terrible depressive state. More and more often she was visited by suicidal thoughts. And the fact that the money from her ex-husband, and really do not get, finished her finally. Cindy spent a lot of time searching for information on the internet. And it is true, if the company was rewritten to another person, and he is less registered as unemployed, no money to be seen. She didn't even try to recover her old cell phone. And the point of that video won't help her anyway. Social networking games. All this girl was no longer interested. She bought herself a push-button phone just to stay in touch with her grandmother and her bosses. Cindy's personal life was forgotten, cut off forever. Like trimming excess greenery from a bonsai tree. On such a cold, straight day, Cindy ran out to the store. The baby was already in the water or feeding, and the jars of baby puree had run out. A freezing wind blew frost and rain in her face, but it wet the woman's curly hair, making it flood even more. Cindy quickened her step. She didn't feel like being outside at all. Her fingertips were starting to feel cold, thankfully. The nearest store was within walking distance of Cindy's house. She was already leaving the supermarket with her bags full of groceries. The store door slammed shut, and Cindy stopped abruptly. Oh man, collapsed, sagging woman. In the time she'd spent in the frost store, the rain had turned into a veritable downpour. The wind harshly conquered now and then, lifting piles of leaves and empty bags into the air. The streets were instantly deserted. The woman took a deep breath and plotted a trajectory to avoid hitting a puddle. Ran with all her might toward the house. She figured if she switched to running, she'd get us a slightly smaller puddle than usual. But then as soon as Cindy, having gained speed, stepped over the first step from the store's porch, she flew down the small staircase. Though her fall was quite insignificant, it seemed to her that her whole life had flown before her eyes. She eased to her knees, managing to put her palms forward. The skin on her arms pulled apart, her back grimaced in pain, and the groceries she had bought rolled forward. Before Cindy realized exactly what had happened, a pitiful whimpering sound was heard from behind her. She turned around before she could get to her feet. Right on the steps lay the cause of her fall, a medium-sized dog. A dark brown colored dog with short hair. Cindy was angry at first. "Why are you getting underfoot?" she shouted. Then she got up, gathered up the groceries in a flash, and once more looked at the dog. The dog shrank from fear, but did not leave the very step on which he lay, most likely a poor animal. Decided to hide from the downpour under the store's canopy and lay down right at the entrance, before realizing that such a place could be quite crowded. Cindy took another look around the dog, all wet, shabby, emaciated. He would have liked to run away, especially after being kicked unintentionally. but the poor thing didn't have the strength for that. Cindy was soaked to the skin, muttering angrily. She was already heading towards the house, but something stopped her. Her heart pricked, and the image of the poor dog came back before her eyes. She came back slowly and reached out her hand, letting the dog sniff it. "Well, whose are you?" she asked, knowing full well that the dog wouldn't answer her. Big eyes, the dog's reflected fear. He tried to stand up to get away from the potential danger, but he could not get up on his paws. He panted pitifully again, pressing his large ears against his head. Cindy Schick came closer to the dog, called out to him. The dog declared with its tail, but failed to rise to its feet. The animal probably had something broken. Then Cindy, scolding herself for being too soft-hearted, rushed toward the house. She quickly jumped up Granny's grocery bag and rummaged for something in the large hall closet. Lucy wondered sneakily, "What's the matter? Where are you in such a hurry?" she asked her granddaughter. "Now, Ba," shouted Cindy from the depths of the pantry. "I found it." She rejoiced and went out into the hallway, holding an old baby blanket in her hands. "Cindy," grandmother splashed her hands. "Will you explain to me what's going on?" Granddaughter, grabbing the car keys from the shelf, quickly retold Lucy the story of meeting a homeless vagrant. The old lady's eyes rounded. "And what are you going to do with this dog? Are you going to bring Cindy home? What if she's sick? Do you have little children?" "I understand," Cindy snapped at her. "I'm taking her to the vet, Grandma." "Well, you should have seen those miserable eyes. The dog's dying. I can't not help, or you're just gonna leave her like that." She looked Grandma in the eye with defiance. "Oh, no, of course not." Lucy was embarrassed. "You're a good, kind soul. Run and save the doggy." When the door behind Cindy slammed shut, the old woman wiped away an incoming tear. "How like her mother," quietly said the old woman. Cindy, taking the car, drove back to the store. She had been gone for literally 15 minutes, and the dog hadn't gone anywhere. It didn't even roll over. The woman noted painfully to herself. She was finally convinced that something was broken in the animal, and her heart clenched again with longing. Cindy, holding the plate in her hands, approached the dog. It wagged its tail weakly. Probably the animal has already managed to realize that this man does not wish her anything bad, but on the contrary, wants to help. Wrapped the dog in a blanket, Cindy, though with difficulty, but lifted the dog in his arms. She carried the animal to her car and loaded into the back seats. The dog silently endured as she was carried in her arms and only moaned weakly. And when it was finally loaded into the car, in the eyes of the animal read such gratitude, such love. Cindy slammed the door, started the car engine, and the car started. They drove to the veterinary clinic. "How many are dazed?" asked Cindy, slamming her big blue eyes. "It's a dog, not an elephant. Why is it so expensive?" The vet fixed the edges of his shirt. "What did you want a woman to keep a pet? It's not cheap these days. Moreover, what condition did you bring the poor thing in? He's got fleas and one eye that can't see. His hind legs are broken. He's got a stomach full of garbage, and now he's suffering from bad blood tests." He took Cindy under his elbow, leading the girl a little farther away from prying ears. "It's not your dog." That's right, Cindy answered quietly. "I found her outside the store, couldn't pass her by." The man rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "My advice to you, give up the idea. That dog is not a live one, believe me. You'll only waste your money on him." Cindy took a sharp step back. "What are you saying? Are you suggesting we leave the poor animal to die? Well, you can pay if you want. But yes, put the dog back on the street. He'll find his peace there." The girl couldn't believe it. To her ears, she raised her voice, attracting the other visitors of the clinic. "What kind of doctor are you? I'm gonna cure this poor animal. Whatever it costs me." Cindy abruptly turned around, heading for the receptionist's desk. "I will find the money to cure this poor thing," confidently said the girl, addressing the veterinary clinic employee. "I need another doctor and a doctor. Found a dog, made an operation, put a cast on, and began a long and costly treatment." All the money that Cindy had managed to put aside with Lucy's rent, and her salary was spent on the dog's treatment. The male animal was no more than a year old. The family spent a long time choosing a name for the new family member. In the end, the rescue was named Tangerine in honor of the very supermarket at which he was found. As time went on, Tangerine became more and more like a dog at home. His dark brown fur became thicker. In his eyes shone true happiness. The children were very fond of their new friend. And even the strict Lucy, though she was stubborn for a long time, opened her heart to the naughty dog. Once Cindy led him home from a walk. In the entryway, let off the leash, Mandarin wagged his tail, rushed forward, and with interest began to provide the door neighbors. While Cindy called the elevator, the dog studied the space around him. The elevator doors opened. Cindy called out to me, and the obedient dog was instantly to the left of his mistress and entered the elevator with her. When they arrived at their floor, Cindy almost crashed into Maria, the neighbor. The elderly woman, waiting for her elevator, with indignation, Cindy stretched out. "Why is that mutt without a muzzle?" And I almost had a heart attack. At the same time, Mandarin hugged the old lady with interest. He went around her from different sides, and without detecting a potential danger, poked his wet nose into the palm of the old woman's hand. The woman wailed, Cindy, put that monster away. He's going to bite me now." She spun around in one place, shrieking nastily. At the same time, the dog took a couple of steps back, drove him and the neighbors. I tilt my head to the side, and there are 3 big ears on you. "Good afternoon, Maria." Cindy said hello. "I'm sorry. I forgot. I let him off the leash. I didn't expect to see you." "What a number." The woman was outraged. "I'm already banned from my own home." She shifted her gaze to the dog, who was already sitting at the foot of the mistress, and studied Maria with interest. She hissed, "Get out of here. Get out of here. He's not touching you," Cindy said, stroking Tangerine's head. "He just wanted to say hello, but he's not mean. He's sociable, friendly. Don't be afraid of our Tangerine." The old lady, having already missed her elevator, laughed Tangerine, a name to match this mongrel. The dog, hearing his name, again approached the neighbor, wagging his tail. The old lady exploded with indignation. You, who's talking?" She twisted in place again, twitching her arms, then swung her big red bag to hit the dog on the head. "Don't," shouted Cindy, taking a step forward. "Don't you yell like that. He won't even look in your direction. Did you call his name?" "Of course he did. He wanted you to devour him." When he saw all the commotion at the Mandarin, he shouted modestly. I guess he wasn't sure what was going on that was inappropriate. What if the angry neighbor was about to lash out at the landlady? He barked again just in case. And Maria ran out towards the stairwell. Take him away, he wants to bite me." "She won't." Cindy shouted back, losing her patience. "Stop this nonsense." "What?" the indignant old woman shouted. Her cheeks were shaking. Her face was pouring paint. I'll have you. "Cindy, you're out of your mind." She ain't got a dime to her name. She's a mongrel in the house dragging, treating their surgeries makes of. She spat in the direction. The girl took a couple steps closer. "Right husband left you." "Crazy," she shouted. Mandarin still did not understand what was happening. Standing up in front of the mistress, Cindy decided not to answer anything. She went to her door, pulling out her key, and quickly entered the apartment. Cindy decided there was no point in arguing with the old lady. Mandarin obediently sat next to her while Cindy elaborated. Then she walked to the bathroom, beckoning the dog to follow her. "Tangerine to wash his paws," she said. And the clever dog skillfully jumped over the edge of the tub and stood waiting to be washed. Lucy peeked into the bathroom. "How was your walk?" she asked. "The girls are asleep. The reindeer are still visiting a friend." "Good, thank you," Bebel shouted the girl without turning around, and my paw to the animal. "Now I do business and go pick up Alex." Okay. What was all that yelling in the entryway? It's Masha again. Cindy, turn off the water, nodded. She took a dog towel and started wiping the dog's feet. She was yelping again, threatening to poison the Tangerines. "No, can you imagine poisoning some crazy woman? He's not evil at all." "That's terrible," commented Lucy. "Yeah, Maria's the kind of person who'd love a reason to get into a fight." And you, Cindy, be careful. You never know. She's really grass on the grass. Cindy felt sick to her stomach. She told the dog to get out of the bathtub and went into the kitchen to feed the dog, and she thought about it. She had a dog once before, a long time ago. In her early childhood, her parents had given their pushy daughter a Dachshund puppy. After all, the girl kept talking about the dog without ceasing, dreaming of how one day she would become a good mistress and faithful dog. Cindy was happy when her dream came true. She named the dog Villa and spent a lot of time with her new friend. Even sometimes forgetting about her friends, the dog brought no problems, and Cindy could never understand why her parents didn't want to get one for so long. Finally, after almost 30 years, Cindy found the reason. As soon as Tangerine appeared in their family, Cindy was surprised to find how many people in the world who do not like dogs to walk their faithful friend. She kept catching slanted glances from strangers. A lot of people were panicking over nothing. Just seeing a large dog in front of her, neighbors were murmuring acquaintances, twisted their fingers at the temple, wondering how it was possible to spend so much money on an animal. Someone, like that neighbor, threatened to poison the innocent dog. Someone occasionally swung his fists. When an innocent dog wanted to simply sniff a stranger, yes, many people were afraid, judged, murmured. But all these unfortunate introductions to the world Berkeley, in the background of the rest of the half of humanity, which is called the dog people. Many smiled at the cute dog, asking permission to pet him. Children passing by waved at the furry dog, reaching out their little hands to the good-natured dog. Cindy has gotten to know many of the dog people who live in her home. They walked their dogs together. Now and then they chatted about nothing and everything in the world. Of course, with Tangerine was a lot of problems at least, because for his treatment, Cindy had to lay out a tidy sum. But Cindy never once regretted taking him in. He was so sweet, so good-natured, always cheerful. He gave the abandoned woman as much love as she needed. He always greeted Cindy with joy. He guarded her. He loved her with the kind of devoted love that only a loyal and kind dog can love as human. Cindy poured food into the bowl, set the well-mannered Mandarin on the floor, sat down. Across from her, tail wagging a bagel. He waited for the command powerfully. Cindy smiled, looking at her pet commanded, and Tangerine proceeded to eat. She was reminded of Lola again. Unfortunately, she had died tragically. Cindy was 8 years old at the time. She was walking her Dachshund not far from the road and got distracted discussing something with one of her Lola friends. After picking up a yard dog, she ran out into the road. The driver did not notice in the darkness low doggy and hit her to death. Poor girl, alas, cried a sea of tears. She was tormented by resentment at the whole world, rejection of grief, guilt. After all, as it seemed to her then, it was her fault for what happened. After the death of Lola, Cindy vowed never to have pets again. Losing them was so painful, so unbearable. Moore never wanted to experience it again. But when she grew up and was already married, she wanted to have a four-legged pet again, but Dave was adamantly against it. "No dogs in my house," he yelled, a source of contagion. "Ew, gross, drool." So Cindy abandoned the idea of getting a pet again. Before she knew it, after her divorce, she was now free to make her own decisions and choices. The arrival of a Tangerine in her life was something unexpectedly new. Tangerine was a true gift of fate. The happy dog finished his food and sat at the feet of his mistress. She looked at him thoughtfully and smiled warmly. "How lucky I am to have you." And the dog came, already smiling and wagging his tail contentedly. It had been almost a year since Cindy had had Tangerine in the house. It was August. The streets of the city were bought by the soft velvet weather. The summer rays had already lost their hot power, becoming weaker and therefore more pleasant. Cindy and the Tangerines went out for their morning walk. The clock showed 7 o'clock. The cool and fresh air was invigorating. The sun was just beginning to warm the earth. The woman let the dog off the leash, stepped out onto the path, took a deep breath. The fresh air was invigorating. The smells mingled with each other. The earth smelled of dry leaves, tempted grass. The scent of approaching fall was in the air. Tangerines, upon hearing the command, the walker happily rushed off to explore the new smells. He ran along the trees. From time to time, he began to dig something with interest, but quickly stopped this business when the stern mistress at the cry of the ox cannot. Cindy watched her pet with pleasure. Looking at the dog, she herself learned to appreciate what she already had. After all, the dog, walking in the same place every day, still studied the surroundings with genuine interest, as if for the first time. Of course, because so much had changed overnight. So many new smells had appeared. So many events had happened in a few hours. That was how Cindy, looking at her friend, learned to appreciate her life. She came to terms with the fact that her husband had left her. Why did she have to suffer so much? Cindy thought to herself, thank God it happened now and not another 10 years later. He didn't deserve all of us. She summed it up. Thinking back on her lingering depression now, she was horrified at how she could even think of ending her life. After all, she had such wonderful children growing up. Watching them grow up was a real joy. After a while, Cindy realized that everything that happened to her is not the biggest misfortune in life. Betraying her husband and her friend had made her stronger. It taught her to understand people, taught her to value her personal space. After all, if she hadn't left her, Dave Cindy wouldn't have saved Tangerine's life. And is there anything more valuable in this world than someone else's life? Tangerine, having finished his business, returned to the feet of Mistress Cindy, clung to his collar at the leash, and headed toward the dog park. As she got closer, she noticed she was already being waved at. Betty's new friend. There was already a whole bunch of people at the playground that Cindy had befriended. Good morning. You're late today, Betty said. She was a tall, big girl with a short haircut. They had met a few months ago, walking their dogs in the yard. Nastya had an adult, a bull terrier, and a daughter the same age as Alex. The kids were now socializing a lot too, walking their dogs together. Hi. Cindy came into the playground, closed the gate behind her, and let Tangerine off the leash again. The happy dog was in the company of several friends in no time. Cindy, we were just waiting for you. The man standing a little farther away from the others said thoughtfully. It was Herbert, another of Cindy's new friends. He had an older, small mongrel dog. Herbert was introduced to Cindy by Betty. We have a great offer for you. Before the cold weather hits. Oh yeah? Interested? Cindy asked, looking at the way Tangerine was fighting with the other dogs. What kind of volunteering? She clarified. All summer long, she and her new group of friends had been busy volunteering. They occasionally brought food and medicine to dog shelters, cleaned up parks, and fed homeless dogs. Such activities cheered Cindy up. She hadn't realized before how wonderful selfless help could be. Herbert nodded his head in agreement. Our park needs volunteers for the fall. We'll need to clean up and update the markings on the jogging paths. We can bring the kids. While we clean up, the kids can play on the playground. All in all, it will be fun and rewarding. Betty got involved in the conversation, taking a step forward. We'll all be there. We were just waiting for you. What do you say? I'm all for it. Cindy replied happily. When we get started. And here they are already tidying up their favorite park. All in all, about 20 people gathered. Most of them came with their children and dogs. A girl named Miranda, who works as a kindergarten teacher, stayed with a group of small children to play with them on the playground. The rest of the adults started cleaning up. Cindy, how are you? Asked Betty. She uncurled her back, warming up, stretching her arms wide and doing pull-ups. I'm getting tired, Cindy replied with a smile on her face. Repeating after her friend, she put aside the trash bags and did a couple of warm-up and back exercises. I'm still full of energy. You want to get some rest? I'll go off on my own here. The volunteers split into pairs and began cleaning up different parts of the park. Betty and Cindy assigned one area closer to the main entrance. No need for that, Betty replied. Back to picking up trash. How are you? Well, how's your morale in general? She smiled modestly, fixing the short strands of her hair. You've been getting prettier and prettier lately. Are you feeling better? Cindy frowned. I'm fine, thank you. Why do you ask? Well, when I met you, you were such a wreck, Betty replied, having had a look beforehand. Not yourself. I didn't tell you this, but I knew right away you needed help. You seem to be getting better. That's why I'm asking if you don't want to answer. I'll understand. Cindy was embarrassed. She looked around, a little changed, but determined to tell her new friend about everything that had happened to her in the last year. Cindy dared to open up to someone for the first time in many months to confide in another person. She almost cried again when she told her husband and her friend how meanly she had been betrayed by her husband and friend. Betty was shocked by what she heard and listened to Cindy to the end without interrupting. What a horrible thing to do. A real pig, the girl commented. Cindy nodded. Yes, that's right. They had done a terrible thing, but that was all in the past. After her own story, Cindy felt like she was back in that very same old state of hopelessness, lost in loneliness. A lump rose treacherously in her throat, and Cindy decided to be a little alone. Betty, I'll step back. You don't mind? I want to be alone for a while. Alone, of course. Sure, go ahead. Take your time. Betty, smiling, snatched the trash bag from her friend's hands. Cindy smiled gratefully. She walked at a slow, leisurely pace, deep in thought. One question suddenly dawned on her. Was I able to let go of this pain? She used to think that the past didn't bother her at all. It seemed to her that all resentments were long forgotten, and she was ready to go forward without a backward glance. But when she was telling Betty about it, the resentment flared up with renewed vigor, flaring up as a fire does when someone pours chamomile into it. She walked on, forgetting everything in the world, and her eyes shot up with tears. Cindy was already out of the park when suddenly Cindy's familiar voice was heard nearby. Kathy, holding Dave under her arm, stopped next to the girl. Noticing her old friend, she seemed to cling to the man even harder, calling his name with her hands. What are you doing here? You look shabby. She giggled and looked at Dave carefully, as if waiting for approval. He didn't change his face. Hi, how are the kids? The man asked. Cindy was shocked. She wiped away her tears with a quick wave of her hand. She took a quick look around herself. She was wearing old clothes she didn't need anymore. This was how all the volunteers dressed when they went out on new assignments. After all, it was supposed to be physical labor, and everyone wore those things that were not sorry to get dirty or torn. Cindy smiled at them through the pain. Hi, the kids are doing great. Really, it would be better if their father paid them decent child support. She took a couple steps forward and looked her ex-husband confidently in the eye. He averted his gaze, embarrassed. Kathy's voice resumed. She's not happy. He's actually paying child support. And you're a mother too. Go work on your own. She ran another appraising glance at Cindy and continued. Although I see you're already working, you got a job as a janitor. Yes. She laughed that you can't do anything else. I'm a volunteer. Cindy answered in a calm tone. You could use some work too. You're not doing the world any good. What kind of child support does he pay? $100 for 3 kids. You laugh, but they do, don't they? Kathy argued. What kind of volunteer work? Is that free or something? Oh, come on. That's about what I expected you to say, though. Cindy smiled demurely in response. She looked at the newly married couple carefully. As much as Kathy wanted to show that they were doing well, something was definitely wrong. But what was it that Cindy couldn't figure out? But something about the look in her eyes at that laugh was so insincere. It seemed like this couple had fallen on hard times. Cindy hummed and turned around on the streams, walked back to the park. This encounter seemed to have given her a renewed vigor. How are you? Asked Betty, noticing Cindy approaching, ready to get back to work. Cindy picked up the garbage bag again. Ready, she smiled cheerfully. Thanks for asking me about the past, and thanks for listening. I think it's gotten better. Betty smiled good-naturedly good. By the way, how would you like to go to an amusement park with the kids this weekend? That's a great idea. Cindy smiled back at her friend. The work that day went as well and fruitfully as ever. As time passed, the years passed one after another, and Cindy's life became brighter, more interesting, and fuller. Cindy's friendship with her new acquaintances became stronger and stronger. Now they did not just walk their dogs, but attended various events. went all together to the movies, bowling, arranged parties for children. The children of the new friends, in turn, also became friends. Already 14-year-old Alex spent more and more time with his friend Lena, daughter of Nastya. The parents often joked that when their children grew older, they would start dating. Cindy finally realized where her calling lay. After consulting with friends and finding a good course, Cindy went to study to become a sinologist. Life began to shine with new colors and became as good as never before. One winter evening, Cindy was playing with tangerines with her children. "Mom, look," Alex stretched forward his hand. "You saw, you saw, you saw." They laughed merrily as they watched the tangerines. There was a clever dog and perfectly understood with whom and in what game it is most profitable to play. He ran up to Alex, holding his toy wheel in his teeth, and offered the boy to play tug of war. When approaching little girls, however, Mandarin immediately turned into an affectionate and lazy dog, laying on the floor and letting the children pet him as much as they wanted. Cindy was sitting on the couch, next to her grandmother, and Alex panted and ran up to her mother, "Mom, and take a video of him. Then we'll put it on the internet, he's so funny." Alex said quickly and ran away from the adults, grabbing the ring again. Cindy fidgeted. She reached into her pocket, looking for her cell phone. But judging by the shrieks, laziness, she didn't have time to capture anything interesting, "Mom. But take a picture. Are you missing so much?" screamed the boy. Cindy was now answering, having never found her smartphone nearby. "Alex, I can't. I don't know where the phone went." "Shit, Mom," replied the boy resentfully. "Well, why can't you take it off? Write it down on your piece of paper then." Cindy thought for a moment. She really had a habit of writing down on small sheets some of her thoughts. And tangerines about girls, about everything in the world. Why did she need to do that? She didn't know herself. That night, after putting the kids to bed, she turned on her old, dusty computer, opened her notes, tapped rapidly on the keyboard. An hour later, Cindy was already rereading the text she had written. In it, she described the Mandarin's entire game, and how amusingly he took his toy away from the laziness, and how cute he was lying around, giving in to the little girls. It ended up being a pretty well-written, humorous story. Cindy reread her work several times with great pleasure, realizing that she seemed to have found a new hobby. Though the girl was not going to post her text anywhere, the very process of writing gave her a lot of joy. Writing about her favorite everything was so interesting and so pleasant that Cindy smiled with all her mouth. And Alenka said without thinking, pondering, "She keeps a document of the story." From that very evening, Cindy began to make little notes about her beloved Mandarin from time to time. "So men, get the bags out," Betty commanded in a businesslike tone. A group of dog owners had gathered once again to help one of the local shelters. The volunteers donated food for homeless dogs, brought some toys and medicine. They set themselves a goal to give away as many stray dogs as possible into good hands, and seriously engaged in this project, putting a lot of their energy into it. Cindy stepped forward, starting a roll call of the gathered volunteers. One by one, people responded, until a single, surprisingly unfamiliar name to Cindy remained on the list. She looked up what purpose that person was supposed to be here for, repeated the name Nick. "Nick the photographer is here." Those standing nearby began to involuntarily look around. The photographer was nowhere to be seen. Okay, apparently the photographer wasn't coming today. Betty took a deep breath. It was a shame. He would have been much needed today. He's a very famous man. I'm surprised you haven't heard of him. Takes pictures of stray animals and puts them on social media. Maybe something's wrong. I'll give him a call. But before Betty could get her cell phone out, the door of the shelter opened and a man burst inside. Sorry, I'm late," he muttered, laughing. A disgruntled Cindy turned around and froze in place. In front of her was a very handsome man. About 40 years old, tall, smiling, self-confident, he smiled broadly around his mouth with many small wrinkles, giving his smile a special charm. Bright, light gray eyes were burning with enthusiasm. His broad shoulders were confidently set. Cindy was embarrassed to realize she had caught the attention of this handsome stranger, finished saying hello to his acquaintances. He took a step in her direction. "Hi, I'm Nick. Today I'm going to take your pictures of 6 Kefis, and in a couple days I'll post them with descriptions." I don't want to brag, but he laughed softly, shooting a hand through his short blonde hair. "The dogs will be snapped up in no time. I have extensive social media contacts. Do you?" He held out his hand to her. "What's your name?" "Cindy," the woman replied. Finally embarrassed, "It was nice to meet you. I thought you weren't coming." "You're insulting me." He smiled again. Cindy stared at his lips as if mesmerized, unable to take her eyes off them. "I'd always keep my word." Nick seemed to be embarrassed now. "But can you help me? I need advice on getting the lighting right." "Sure," Cindy answered quickly. He nodded his head gratefully, putting his hand out in front and allowing Cindy to go first. That's when Nastya's sly laugh erupted. "He doesn't know how to pick up the lighting." "Of course," she giggled, patting Nick on the shoulder. And the kids are the master." Betty winked at Cindy and quickly ran off somewhere. Cindy, on the other hand, poured on the paint and walked forward before Nick could notice the embarrassment on her face. The two of them managed to get some great pictures of stray dogs. True, Cindy didn't quite realize how she had been involved in making those pictures. After all, Nick was the only one who did everything, but he confidently convinced the others that the good pictures were solely due to Cindy. That same evening, the photographer invited her to dinner. So they got to know each other better, and Cindy happily realized that the man liked her as much as she liked him. Nick turned out to be not only a popular photographer, but also an avid dog person. He had 2 Spitzes that he treated like his own children. Cindy carefully made inquiries about his past. He had never been married, and no children appeared to be in his possession. When he learned that Cindy was raising 3 children alone, he was absolutely thrilled. There was immediately an immense amount of respect in his eyes. Nick and Cindy exchanged phone numbers. The new friend made Cindy promise that she would introduce him to the children. And so a new couple was formed. These two were very supportive of each other, more and more dissolved in their relationship. After a couple months of their close acquaintance, Cindy invited Nick to her house. Nick helped Cindy put the girls to bed. Alex was absolutely delighted with his mom's new friend. When Lucy's children had already gone to bed, Nick asked Cindy a favor to use the computer. Something needed to be done urgently for work. Cindy unlocked it for now and went to take a shower while her boyfriend was busy working. When she returned, she noticed a sly smile on the photographer's face. "What are you doing?" "Smiling," asked the girl. "Already finished and allowed myself a little too much." "Sorry," he spread his hands, continuing to smile slyly. "What's the matter?" asked Cindy, removing the towels from his head. "What's so extra?" I was about to turn off the computer when suddenly an interesting file caught my eye. "Sorry, I read the whole thing. You didn't tell me you were such a talented writer." He walked over to the girl, taking her hand. "You have great stories. Where do you publish them?" Cindy embarrassed, squeezing the man's hand with slender fingers. "Nowhere. I write for myself. Who else would want my stories?" "What do you mean, who?" Nick was genuinely surprised at everyone. "You owe it to yourself to publish them. Your notes shouldn't just gather dust. Let's get you a social networking page." "Oh, well," Cindy wondered. "I don't know. Do you think anyone would want that?" "Sure, you're a dog behaviorist. So you can share your knowledge with your followers. And every once in a while, you'll post your stories. It's both useful and entertaining. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. Your writing will be a success," Nick said confidently. He went back to the computer again, quickly bored into the keyboard. "Done. Let's come up with a nickname for you." Cindy laughed, let's. And the lovers started going through various options for Cindy's future. Cindy and Nick's relationship was growing rapidly. 6 months passed since they met, and the couple finally decided to move in together. Nick moved to live in Cindy's apartment, and they began renting out his place. Lucy blessed them and moved back into her apartment. The elderly woman liked her granddaughter's new choice, and she continued to be a frequent visitor to her biological father's newly formed family. The twin girls never had time to remember because they were still very young when Dave left the family. So the little sisters called Nick Daddy. After a while, Alex started to call his stepfather Dad. They developed a very close and trusting relationship. Money in the family became much more. After all, Nick was earning well. But do not forget about the achievements of Cindy. The mother of 3 children also formed a good income. She also continued to work as a cinematographer and actively maintained her blog, the same one she started with Nick. He took beautiful pictures of Mandarin for her, and Cindy herself published her notes and shared her knowledge of dog training. Nick the Spitz managed to befriend Tangerine. Cindy's life, once abandoned and deserted by her husband, was filled with a happiness she had never dreamed of. It was a warm, spring evening. Nature was just beginning to awaken from its long winter sleep, and the day was getting longer. A warm May breeze was blowing. There were fresh smells coming from everywhere, and all the plants were blooming. Cindy walked with a confident gait, and with her lush curls with large branches blowing in the wind, her bright eyes were burning with true happiness. She was wearing a light, airy blue dress. Cindy was going to a small cafe, because that's where she was organizing a meeting with her subscribers today. A couple of days ago, having announced this action in her social networks, Cindy was surprised to find out that many of her subscribers lived with her in the same city. Admirers of her work from time to time flooded her with questions about whether a reunion with her subscribers was possible. Finally, Cindy was ripe for such an event. And here she was already opening the door of the cafe. She had one big announcement to make today. She was going to be publishing a collection of her short stories about dogs very soon. Cindy couldn't wait to share such great news with her subscribers. As soon as she entered the cafe, she was immediately overwhelmed by a wave of applause. People who came to the meeting rose from their seats, welcoming their favorite blogger. Some were whistling, others had already rushed to hug the famous cinematographer, offering to take a joint photo. Some of them were just shouting something from the audience that was hard to hear. Cindy tried to pay enough attention to everyone, but alas, it did not work out well. The crowd was much larger than the newfound celebrity had expected, and the room was too small to accommodate all the people who came. Subscribers kept coming up and down the line. They asked for advice about the proper upbringing of dogs, about how one can learn to write stories so well and so interestingly. It turned out that some of her subscribers even traveled from other cities to meet Cindy in person. The girl was wrapped up in so much attention that she completely forgot about her big news. When Cindy calmed down the crowd a bit and went to the center of the hall to answer all the questions one by one, the door opened abruptly. She turned her head and saw him, her Nick. The subscribers again exploded with cheers of approval, because it was thanks to his popularity on the internet that Cindy was able to reach her heights. Nick, already used to being recognized on the streets, calmly walked forward, took a few pictures with the subscribers, and stood next to Cindy, raising his hand to say something. Everyone fell silent. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" Nick said loudly, causing even the most active fans to come over, taking it out. "I have an important announcement to make." A ringing silence reigned in the hall. One could only hear the refrigerators in the cafe's kitchen running. Everyone was silent for a moment, listening to Nick. He looked at everyone with a scrutinizing gaze, and then turned toward Cindy. Cindy herself had no idea what was going on. She held her breath, anticipating some important event. "Cindy, I wanted to tell you one important thing today, as I believe she hasn't had time to share her plans with you yet. Perhaps that's for the best." He looked around the room again, intriguingly, shooting his eyes. "But now I have another equally important announcement to make." The photographer abruptly dropped to one knee, in parallel pulling out a box containing an engagement ring from his pocket. When everyone present realized what he was going to do, the hall exploded again with cheers and applause. Nick raised his voice. "Cindy, will you marry me?" Having said this, kneeling down, he opened the box and revealed a ring to Cindy. It was a gold engagement ring with a large and daintily bound sapphire. He took into account the interest of the audience beforehand and showed the subscribers the ring. He then shifted his gaze back to Cindy in expectant anticipation. Of course, she said yes. Cindy pulled her husband-to-be by the hand. He rose from his knees and the couple merged in a kiss. They immediately began to be blinded by the flashes of cell phone cameras, because those present were racing to take pictures and videos of such an important event. When the lovers finally broke away from each other, and the intensity of emotions in the institution has slightly reduced. The couple again received questions from the audience. Someone shouted out, "What else did you want to tell? What's the big news?" Cindy started to look for the person who asked the question, when suddenly she noticed Kathy standing in the farthest corner. Blood came to the girl's face. Her hands shook for some reason. "What's wrong with me?" Cindy thought grudgingly. She had gotten used to having so much attention directed at her lately. But Kathy. She stood with her arms folded under her breasts, her once bright and long hair having lost its former luster. Her face had faded as well. Goosebumps ran down Cindy's back. There was something unkind about Kathy, something strange. Cindy tried to pull herself together. She took a couple of deep breaths and finally answered yes. There was more important news besides our wedding. She was silent for a while, repeating after Nick, trying to keep the pause necessary for intrigue. "Very soon I will release my first book." The subscribers once again murmured happily. Cindy, satisfied with the result, began to tell the audience what the book was about, when it would be released, and how much it would cost. While listing all this, she could not take her eyes off her former friend. All the while, Kathy continued to stand in the corner of the brown Cindy, with an angry and very unpleasant stare. A chill ran down Cindy's back. She realized it was about time to end the meeting. Cindy announced that she and Nick would be leaving the cafe very soon, and she could take a picture with a few fans. The people began to slowly disperse, and then Kathy came up, "Hi, friend." She started suddenly, joyfully. From the evil and unkind smile, there was no trace of it. Kathy had a big smile on her face. "I see you're doing great, and you're doing great, and you deserve respect." Cindy shuddered again. It seemed that such an outcome should have flattered her ex-girlfriend, the same friend who had stolen Cindy's husband, the same friend who had almost driven Cindy to suicide. She's standing across the street, all scholarly and enthralled, and she's happy, successful, almost a celebrity. She has just been proposed to by a beautiful man, one of the most enviable suitors in their town. But why was her heart clenched by some incomprehensible anxiety? Cindy did not understand why she could not gloat. Kathy smelled something wrong, something cold, evil. Cindy answered, "What do you want?" "Where are your manners? Pretending?" Kathy wondered, "Are you being such a buka? Kathy, are you serious now?" asked Cindy with undisguised irony in her voice. "I'm not interested in talking to you," she said, and headed for the exit. Nick was already waiting for her at the door, watching the conversation between the two girls. Suddenly, Kathy grabbed Cindy's arm roughly. "But what's wrong with you?" "We're friends," she hissed through a fake smile. Kathy tried her best to look good-natured, sweet, but alas, it was not working out well. "What do you want me to apologize for?" she continued. "If it's so fundamental, please, I'll apologize." Cindy was numb with horror. Kathy's movements were too abrupt, compulsively abnormal. Chilled, she began to break free from her former friend's tenacious grasp. Nick rushed over to the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked, gently yanked persistent Kathy away. "Our meeting is already over. Please leave," confidently said the man. "And I won't sign off. I'm an old friend of Cindy's." She tried to smile sweetly, but her smile was more like a grin. "I came to make up with her. We're friends again." She shifted her gaze to Cindy. Did Cindy shake her head? "No, you have never been my friend, and you never will be. I don't need to socialize with you, and neither do you. Get out of here, and go to Dave. Life doesn't look like it's working out much, though." She laughed, trying to put all her resentment into that laugh. "Goodbye, bitch, and don't ever come near me again." Cindy, taking her fiancé under her arm, left the cafe, leaving the separated all alone. Soon Cindy and Nick were married. They arranged a lavish, beautiful celebration, and the wedding of two famous volunteers around the city for a long time went admiring stories, growing into the most unbelievable details. At the same time, Cindy published her first book. As expected, it was a colossal success. The number of her subscribers increased. her income doubled even more, and Cindy herself became no longer just a dog blogger, but a real and very famous writer. The family continued to do volunteer work, thus promoting the idea of gratuitous help to the masses. And it bore fruit. More and more people began to help shelters, picking up unfortunate animals from the streets. They finally paid attention to the state of the environment. Not only Cindy's life changed, but also the life of the whole town she lived in. On one of the most ordinary and unremarkable days, Cindy went out for a tangerine walk in the early hours of the morning, leaving the children with Lucy. Nick had left even earlier, taking the Spitz with him. The photographer had some important project to do. Cindy went out to the park, and it looked like it. It was late fall again. Like many years ago, the wind had conquered like a lone wolf, and the dull leaves danced their last dance. Involuntarily, Cindy was reminded of the very day when she had first met the Mandarin. So miserable, exhausted, much abandoned by all, she lowered her gaze to her favorite dog. She couldn't tell now that this dog had once been a street dog. Dense, thick fur, it seemed to glisten. On the wide neck of the dog was a luxurious collar. A thick, lush tail wagged with happiness. She smiled, giving her memories of Tangerine, as if sensing what his mistress was thinking, jabbed his big wet nose into her palm. Cindy and Tangerine walked leisurely along the edge of the nearby forest lanes, setting up for a long walk, but the unexpected sound of a text message made the girl stop. Damn. She took off her gloves, reached deep into her warm jacket for her smartphone's unlock screen. The message was from an unknown number, and the blogger had already managed to roll her eyes, thinking it was another persistent fan, when suddenly she froze in place. The text message that arrived read, Cindy, read this message to the end. Dave is dying. Surgery soon, but there is little hope. Things are not going well for him. Please come to the clinic. He's really waiting for you, Kathy. Cindy was angry when she read the text message. How dare she manipulate such things? She thought. The first thing that came to her mind was Kathy had just made it all up just to set her up somehow. But why was she frowning? And the Mandarin, noticing the change in her mistress's mood, suddenly fell asleep and began to look into her eyes. The girl put the phone away, put on gloves, and with a quick step, headed towards the house. Something's fishy, and I'm going to find out what it is, she thought, coming home to wash and feed the dog. Cindy picked up her phone again. She reread the text message, wondering. At the same moment, a worried Lucy came into the room. Cindy, what are you doing? Asked the older woman. Cindy, without saying a word, shoved her smartphone with an open message into her grandmother's hands. Perplexed, the old woman reached into her pocket for her glasses. When Lucy read the text message, she unconsciously covered her mouth that opened in surprise. Cindy, why are you sitting there? Go away. This is not a joke, the woman said excitedly. Do you think so? Cindy answered suspiciously. I think it's a joke, and a very stupid and even nasty one at that. Dave's always been a horse's health. I don't know. But I don't feel like going. What are you talking about? Lucy continued to be indignant. No one would joke about such things. Go there and find out, Cindy thought for a moment. Verti, and the cell phone in her hands. She went through her own thoughts for a long time, until she remembered her good and kind friend Gina. The one just worked as a doctor in the local hospital, and probably had access to the database of all patients. She quickly dialed his phone number and explained the situation. She gave her ex-husband's name and surname, asking him to find out if everything her ex-girlfriend had written about was true. Kennedy agreed to help Cindy without any problems and asked her to wait a bit. Cindy, nervously biting her lip, began to set up circles around the room. Concerned Lucy decided not to bother her granddaughter's eyes and left the room, heading for the nursery. Finally, a reply came from the Genin. Cindy opened the text message with shaking hands and was stunned that everything Kathy had written was true. Dave was indeed dying. Without a second thought, Cindy quickly packed and left for the hospital. No matter how she felt about her traitorous husband's death, she had never wished him dead. Dave lay in the hospital bed, unable to even turn his head. His appearance frightened the girl. Dark circles under his eyes in the floor, and cheeks thin, skinny shoulders. It was the first time in her life Cindy had ever seen him in such a haggard state. "Dave, how neat you are," Cindy asked. "You wanted to see me?" And without moving, Dave raised a pained voice. "Cindy, sit down." Cindy complied with the dying man's request and obediently sat on the edge of his bed. He squeezed her hand weakly. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I know it will be hard, but please forgive me. I know what I did was mean to you, to the children. I know how hard this has been for you. I realize that. I'm terribly embarrassed, Kathy." "She is." He fell silent. Cindy dared not interrupt his speech. After a couple of long seconds, Dave finally continued, "I've written a will. I'm leaving all my business to our children. That bitch will get nothing." He must have summoned all his strength to say the above and almost choked in a coughing fit. "All I'm asking you for is forgiveness. Can you forgive me?" Cindy didn't know what to answer him. She herself couldn't understand exactly how she felt. Probably nothing but pity and compassion. "I forgave you a long time ago, Dave," she said. "You can rest easy about that, can't you? Thank you." There was a hoarse goodbye. The body was dying and helplessly covered its eyes. Time went by. Days ran one after another. Life went on as usual. The children grew up. Cindy's blog grew, and sales of her books only increased. Dave, like Kathy, was never heard from again. Eventually, the blogger decided that Dave had already died. Cindy was hesitant to tell her children about what had happened to their father. The girls didn't even know he existed and had always thought Nick was their real father. And relatively adult Alex vaguely remembered about him and made up his own opinion as a man of bad and unworthy example. And the real father to him was Nick, too. "Cindy, can you tell me which breed is the best to train? Which one would have the least amount of problems?" The young blonde girl raised her hand to ask her question. "If you're looking for the easy way out, get a toy dog." Cindy replied cheekily, and laughter erupted throughout the room. Raising any breed of dog is time multiplied by labor, plus a lot of love. You can't do it without love, Cindy smiled. Today, she was holding another meeting with readers. The event had already lasted for several long hours. When it was finally over, Cindy left to put on her outerwear, a back room. As she returned to the exit, she noticed a male figure in the lobby with a bouquet in his hand. The woman wrinkled her nose. How could she be sick of these obsessive admirers? When he saw her, he rushed toward her, and she looked up at him and was stunned. Dave was standing in front of her, alive and unharmed. His once sunken face and cheeks had once again rounded out behind the left-handed man with a healthy blush. His weight had returned to normal. Cindy slammed her eyes shut in surprise. "Dave, is that you?" she asked in amazement. "Who did you expect to see?" He smirked and studied her bouquet of scarlet roses. "Your favorite flowers," he said proudly. Cindy gloomed. "I've never liked roses." "You forgot her cough. I'm certainly glad you're alive. But why did you come?" "Your forgiveness brought me back to life," Dave exclaimed pathetically. "The operation was so successful that my doctor said it was a miracle. Can't you imagine? And then I realized the whole point was that you gave me another chance. I came back to life to be with you again." The man spoke with a huff. He seemed to be reciting a poem rather than speaking from the heart. Cindy laughed in his face. "What are you talking about? I didn't give you a chance. I've been married a long time. My children have a wonderful father, and it's not you at all." And that's when Nick walked into the room. He gave Dave a disapproving look. "Honey, is everything all right?" the photographer asked, taking his wife's hand. "Everything's fine," Cindy replied calmly. "Let's go home." And the couple left the building, leaving Dave all alone. On a quiet summer evening, Cindy sat with her laptop and a glass of wine in the lovely gazebo at Vita's and Wild Grapes. Nick, nestled nearby, was reading something. A couple of days ago, they had gone with their children and grandmother, and of course, their pets to the countryside to Nick's dacha. To have a little vacation in silence, away from the noise of the big city. This idyll was interrupted by a concerned Alex, "Mom, Dad," gently began the eldest son. "Didn't you watch the latest news?" "No, we are resting from the noise of information," answered Nick, smiling. "What's the matter?" Well, the boy stretched out. How can I put it? He softly shoved his tablet into the photographer's hands. It already had the video open on it on compressed to a stop. Cindy too reached for the clipboard to see exactly what her son wanted to show them and was stunned. The still frame showed Kathy, who appeared to be giving an interview. In the bottom corner was a brightly colored caption, shocking details from the life of a celebrity blogger. Cindy didn't know what to think. She pressed the play button, watched the video with each new minute, and her eyes widened and widened. It was really an interview Kathy had given to some reporter. In it, she said things that made the blood rush from the back of her veins. The ex-girlfriend was blatantly lying about Cindy's life. She was making up stories to smear her reputation. Allegedly, Cindy bullies mandarins by only using it for content. Made up that Cindy despises volunteers and hates animals, that she stole her current husband Nick away from her family with 3 young children, depriving them of their father's support and child support. She seemed to be making it up as she went along. When the video ended and Cindy, dumbfounded, looked around at her loved ones. The first to raise his voice was Alex. "That's Aunt Kathy, isn't it?" Asked the boy. "Why did she say such nasty things about you? You didn't do anything bad to her." He changed a little, but dared to say the following: "You never told us about it. But she's the one who stole it." He stopped talking. Probably didn't want to call his biological father Daddy. "She's the one who stole Dave. I figured it out when I was a kid. He used to bring her over when you weren't home." "Tell Matt it's true. I'm an adult." Cindy was stunned. She had no idea that little Alex understood everything. He'd seen his father cheat on his mother. He'd seen his family destroyed. Heart said hurt for her son. "My poor little boy," Cindy thought wistfully. She said to him, "Yes, honey, you got it right, but it's all in the past. Your dad has come to his senses. He apologized to us. All the offenses are forgotten, and you please do not be angry with him." The boy exploded with indignation. "That asshole is not my father." That's him pointing his finger at Nick. "That's my daddy. I don't need another one," he shouted. He grabbed the clipboard and with a quick movement, sprinted toward the house. "I'll go talk to him," said the photographer, rising from his seat. He placed a kiss on his wife's forehead and followed her out. Cindy was left alone, holding the clipboard. Cindy realized that many people would certainly not believe this crazy woman's tales. But then again, not everyone would. She turned off the video, not wanting to look at that rather sleek face again. Cindy realized that a serious conversation with her former friend could not be avoided. A week later, she was sitting in an expensive restaurant, waiting for her interlocutor. She made an order and already started her lunch when suddenly, as if out of nowhere, Kathy appeared in front of her. She grudgingly hummed and roughly plumped into the chair opposite. "What the hell did you want?" God, all the years that had passed and apparently not the most successful for her were making themselves felt. Her former best friend had already lost her former beauty. Her face seemed to have swollen. More accurately, her body had blurred into extra pounds. She grabbed the menu and felt indignant. "But you're completely overpriced. I can't afford this menu. I'll pay for everything." In a calm tone, Cindy said, not taking her eyes off her salad. "But you're ready to start talking." Kathy replied, giggling nastily. She beckoned to the waiter and poked at the most expensive dish at random. "Bring me that one. You and I have nothing to talk about." "Did you say so yourself?" she added snidely, turning to Cindy. "Or that you were afraid? That the whole truth about you would come out?" "What truth?" Cindy asked, carefully wiping her mouth with a napkin. "We both know it's bullshit. Tell me, why do you need this? What's missing in your life?" "I miss everything, the body odor of anger. I'm sick of people like you. You haven't accomplished a damn thing and you're making a big deal out of yourself." "Ooh, I'm the one who hasn't accomplished anything." Cindy's getting angry. "What have you accomplished, darling?" "Stole your best friend's husband, deprived his children of a father and a livelihood." "Well done, bravo. Too bad most people won't appreciate such accomplishments." Cindy adjusted the edges of her clothes. "Now listen here. I don't know why you're acting like this. Nasty bitch. I guess life with Dave wasn't so sweet, but I don't care about that." Stop gossiping about me right now. She leaned on the edge of the table and looked threateningly at Xenia. Or you'll be sorry. Screw you. We're doing fine. Kathy shouted back, jumping up from her seat. Without waiting for my order, I leave. She got up and ran out of the restaurant. Cindy shook her head unhappily. She leisurely finished her meal, then invited the waiter to pay the bill. When the girl had already reached for her wallet to pay for her lunch, Kathy returned to the restaurant premises. You know what? She shouted, ignoring the perplexed looks of the other diners. You're right. Your hubby turned out to be a real creep. He cheated on me all the time. He lied to me. He didn't trust me with anything. He beat me. Kathy kept yelling, completely out of control. And here you are, all successful and glamorous and rich. I hate you, you hear me? I hate you. Cindy was genuinely surprised, but she didn't let it show. Of course, Dave had never been a perfect husband. His cheating didn't surprise the girl one bit, but to hit her. Cindy was at a loss. She put several large bills on the bill. Threw her ex-girlfriend a cold stare. That's not my husband, darling, that's your husband. With those words, Cindy left the restaurant. The door to the apartment opened and Cindy began to fan out in the hallway. She had 3 furry creatures at her feet, Tangerine and Spitz, Bush and Kitty, jumping up and down and happy to have their mistress back. It was a real and furry storm. Nick barely made it through the dog typhoon. He came up to his wife. How did it go? Asked the man. Oh, Cindy turned out as expected. You talked to her. Did Cindy thoughtfully lose her chin? I think not. The photographer raised his eyebrows in surprise. Why? Why are you so calm about it? I know her character will only get worse. We have to do things differently. And I already know how and how surprised, asked Nick, lifting Dusha in his arms. I'll write another book, Cindy said proudly. I'm going to write everything that has happened to me in the last few years. I will write about how I met Mandarin, how he changed my fate. I will present all the evidence of how I was betrayed. Once the people closest to me, no one else will ever believe Kathy again. I know how to do the right thing in a confident and calm tone, the writer spoke. Her spouse looked at her with a mixture of pride and respect. He put his arm around her and said, I believe in you. You're doing great. Kathy forcefully slammed the book shut, tossing it aside. The weighty tome flew away and fell onto the old carpet, raising a cloud of dust behind it. She shouted hate in her heart. At her scream, Dave entered the room. What ripped? He asked, not hiding his annoyance. Cindy Book, she had always been talented, dreamily said the man. I remember she used to compose such lullabies for Alex. So go to her. Kathy was furious. Ah, yes, she sent you. She does not need you. Calm down. And he raised his voice after her. You're right, she doesn't need me anymore. She's married again. I'm just sick of you. He came closer to her, still holding his ex-wife's book. I'm leaving. I don't know when I'll be back. Don't bother me. Where are you going with anger in your voice? Asked Kathy. None of your business. He made his way to the closet, starting to pick out his clothes. By the way, what do you think of Cindy's new book? I haven't had a chance to read what it's about yet. Kathy clutched his head with his hands on the couch, like he always does. About that nasty mutt, I don't know who I hate more than her. Or that nasty little song? What did that dog ever do to you? Dave asked irritably and slammed the door. Kathy continued to rage. She embarrassed me. That dog embarrassed me. At that moment, Kathy had a terrible and wild thought and jumped to her feet. She looked out into the hallway. Dave had already taken up his shoes. She waited for him to leave the apartment, and with eyes burning with rage, she rushed into the kitchen. There she reached under the sink and pulled out cockroach poison. Aha looked in the refrigerator and pulled out a raw steak from the package, stuffed it with poison, and chanted, I hate it. I hate it. Suddenly, this activity was interrupted by a cell phone ringing. Hello, Mom, what do you want? Annoyed Kathy shouted into the phone. Now. No, I'm busy right now. Her voice had already turned to a squeal, but her mother seemed to be adamant. She urged Kathy to come right away. Something had broken or exploded in there. Irritated beyond belief, Kathy barked into the phone palm, quickly threw the poisoned meat into the refrigerator, and ran out of the apartment. A couple hours later, Dave returned to the apartment. Not having found at home his beloved relieved, exhaled the last few years. Dave had regretted more than once that he traded his family for Kathy. She turned out to be so stupid, so rude, so different from what Cindy had been after her illness and miraculous recovery. He didn't sleep at night, waning himself at having abandoned her and the children. Shame devoured the man's heart, searching out the remnants of good in the black abyss, where his soul had long ago faded. He realized everything that day when he was on the verge of death. Dave had tried to leave Kathy many times, but each time he had failed. Suddenly he felt sorry for her. But who needs her now? Losing her former beauty, immersed in his own sad thoughts, Dave went to the bedroom and changed his clothes. An hour ago, he had tried to meet Alex, to talk to him, to try to apologize. Prepared a gift, but his son had grown up, sent Dave away. "You're not my father," screamed in his face. "Go back to your bitch. Maybe she'll comfort you." Dave pulled out a bottle of whiskey, poured the glass almost to the brim, and drank it in one gulp, trying to get away from the humiliation he'd just experienced. Yes, he's absolutely right. The man thought, disgusted with himself. "She can't even make dinner," he said indignantly. Swung open the refrigerator and pulled out raw steaks, praised in a container. Pouring oil into a skillet, he picked up the first piece he could find and dipped it in the spices. The strange odor emanating from the meat didn't confuse the lunging Dave at all. Within minutes, he was greedily biting large chunks off the freshly cooked meat. Returning, Kathy soon found her spouse on the floor of the scientist's kitchen in an unnatural pose. An ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. There was nothing more they could do. That Kathy had tried to poison him, not him, but the tangerine. Cindy and her family learned from the newspapers at the inquest that the unwilling ruler had told the truth, hoping for leniency and commutation of her sentence. Cindy was no longer interested in the woman's fate. But Nick then saw a glimpse in the news that she was given 8 years in a penal colony for involuntary manslaughter. "Son, we wanted to talk to you about your father." Nick gently began the conversation. He, interrupting the kid's indignation with a gesture, continued, I know what you are going to say, but please just listen to us." "Alex, you're a big boy now," Cindy added. "It's time you learn to forgive. Understand, resentment, anger, all this only destroys your own soul, destroys you from the inside. It is very important to be able to forgive sweet, not only for your unfriends, but above all for yourself. Mom says important things." The son listened to them. Nick supported his wife. "No matter what, I'll always be your father, and you'll always be my son. But Dave once gave you life, forgive him now. Maybe wherever he is right now. Your forgiveness will do him a lot of good." Alex thought deeply, biting his lower lip, "But he's such a jerk, Ma. He's so mean to you, to me, to the girls." "That's right, honey, but he was very remorseful before he died. You remember, don't you? Try to understand him, understand and forgive him." Cindy said, looking into her son's eyes. The boy was silent for a long time, lowering his head. "Okay, I understand everything." Alex looked his mother in the eyes. "What should I do?" "Alex, honey, you're good. Let's go. Let's go to the cemetery. He's your birth father. You'll tell him at the grave. Everything you have to say, you'll see. Will it make you feel better?" Cindy hugged her son tenderly. Another November was drifting away, the dull leaves swirling and stirring with the first snowy kicks of cold. The fish were standing so cold that their faces burned with the icy breath of approaching winter. The town cemetery was deserted and dreary. A white, tall Jeep drove leisurely along the wet, narrow paths, stopping at a fresh grave with a simple wooden cross. The doors opened and 2 people came in. A tall, beautiful woman in a black leather cloak, and with her a young man with a calm, handsome face, very much like his mother, got out of the car. "Hello, Father," said the boy, approaching the cell phone hill. "I came to say that I forgive you. Things happen in life. It's a pity that we did not have time to make up with you. But I understand now. Thanks to Mom, she's always been very nice to everyone, even you. And it worked, you know? He smiled softly. So come on, Dad. May the earth rest in peace, or whatever they say. Anyway, go ahead. He placed a bouquet of white carnations on the freshly dug in new ground and stepped aside. A woman standing to the side came up to him and took his hand. They smiled at each other, got into the car, and drove away. And the wind continued its sad and mournful autumn dance. But through the dense blue and low-hanging clouds, sunlight occasionally broke through, promising the world a new spring and a new hope.